and I had a heck of a time. The deck was 1 inch thick, and I had to change my torque because I couldn't get it hot enough to 1 inch, so I had to put a big tip on there and increase the pressure. I cut a hole in there, and pretty soon there's a fish came up there. I said, "How many men down there?" He says, "There's 10 men down here." I says, "Well, I'll get a blower," and we got a blower from the battleship next door. We put air down there, and I said, "I want to cut a hole about 20 inches in diameter and stay clear there." The air was down there because when that opened that hatch, that air came up through there and it caused the water to rise higher in that void. And it took me about an hour to cut a 20-inch hole. And we had to get a big sledgehammer and hit them hard to get that hatch down there. And I got the men out. I had about 10 men under there. By that time, the shipfitters from the battleship next door, next to them, they had come over and they were starting cutting holes and getting men out. So we cut all morning. The rest of the afternoon there, we got probably 100 men out of those from the engine rooms and boiler rooms. And it must have been getting dusk, and I hadn't had anything to eat all day, so they brought over a ham sandwich and some lemonade. So I ate a ham sandwich and lemonade, and then we had to stop burning because it was getting dark, and there could be no lights because they're afraid my wife is in the other room, she'll get it. So where was I now?
It was night and you had to stop cutting?
Oh yeah, I started cutting. And so they said, well, we can't burn it because the Japs had come over again. About that time, some planes came over and our B-17s were coming from the bay, from the San Francisco, coming into Hawaiian Island. And they were shooting our planes down because they had no communications. They didn't know who they were. So all the planes kind of dispersed and flew around, and I guess they got a hold of Hickam Field and wanted to know where they could land. Hickam Field is right close to Pearl Harbor there. So they started landing these B-27s there, and some of them went on the other side of the island and landed over there. In the meantime, some of our planes, 2 aircraft carriers, had delivered some planes to some islands that time, and the planes were coming back. They heard about Pearl Harbor being attacked, and they were shooting them down too, so they were having a hard time landing. So they had to land on the other side of the island, and it was quite confusing. Anybody would shoot anything that they didn't know who they were. So finally, I guess they could organize who they were and got them down. But we lost a lot of planes that night. And then I went over to the receiving station there, and there was no bunks or anything, and we were in a gymnasium there, so we had to sleep on the bleachers without blankets or anything. And so they got us up at 6 o'clock in the morning and put us into a working party. And since I had a torpedoman second-class rating, they thought I was a second-class torpedoman. And they gave me 10 men, and they said, "You're going to go over to the Arizona and go up on the forward part of the ship." And he says, "That's still out of the water, out of the fire, and the fires are pretty well out." So we got up there, and there was a big pile of men. They were just one on top of the other. It must have been 50 more men. And they gave us a roll of sheeting. We were supposed to get these bodies and wrap them in sheeting and drop them down. And we started pulling the men off the top. They were pretty well crisp and burnt, but as we got down deeper, the ones down below, you touched their legs and all the skin, and meat would come off their legs, and they were just boiled like chickens. And I got so sick from them. The men said, we can't do this. We were just vomiting, and I've never handled bodies like that. And I called down to the chief down below. I says, we can't do this. I said, we're coming down. These bodies are just impossible to take up. They just flesh. There's no way we can know who's who. They all had dog tags on, but they were buried in the flesh. So he said, come on down. And he says, we'll take you back over to the receiving station. They'll give you something else to do. So we did that. So on the way back to they stopped off the West Virginia, and I said, there's while I was that morning down there cutting that hatch, getting that cargo net off that thing, the men in the number 4 turret were running out, and they said there's a bomb exploded in the number 4 turret. It came down and made a hole through the top, but it stuck in the deck. It didn't explode. And these guys got out and dived over the side because they didn't know whether that bomb was going to explode or not. So I said, I want to go and look and see what they're talking about. So I looked in the hatch and climbed in, and here that big bomb, big 16-inch, 1,000-pound bomb, the whole top of it was just opened up, and you could see nails and razor blades and everything in there, but it didn't explode. So I went back down out and I said, Jesus, it could have got me if that had exploded, because I would have never been able to do what I did. So God was with me all that morning and the next day. So I think God was talking to me that day. I never did ever tell anybody because I didn't think they would believe me. But the next day I had to go and be interviewed by a chaplain, a Catholic chaplain. And he says, how do you feel? I said, well, I'm alive. But I said, something happened and nobody's going to believe me. He said, what happened? Well, I think God talked to me. God talked, what did he say? He said, take charge. Did he say, didn't tell you anything else? I just did what I was told to do. And he said, well, how do you know what to do? He must have been telling me to do it, because I don't know, I could have never done that. I was only 19, and I'm saving all these people. And I just, to this day, I'm so thankful that I said that prayer, because my mother always used to say, if you get in trouble, you recite this prayer. And that's what I did. So anyway, they assigned me to a submarine tender, the Peleus, and since I was a ship fitter, they needed repair people on there, and I said, they said, we're going to go to Australia to repair submarines down there. So they said, first we have to go down to San Francisco to pick up some new engines and some guns. And we stopped down there for 2 days. And I stopped and said hello to my mother, and we had to get back the ship, and the next day we left for Australia, and went down to Fremantle, and we were repairing submarines down there for a year. And while I was there, I made second class, and right away, I had just made third class earlier, and because of my experience, I guess they made me second class, and so every time we had maybe 5 or 6 submarines alongside repairing them, and they were putting 5-inch guns on them and repairing their hatches or any damage that was done when they were depth charged, and they were going back out again. And so since I was a swimmer, I had to go down and take off these screws from these submarines that were bent from the discharge. And while we were down there, we were always getting sharks down there. And so we had one guy with a big prob and watching the sharks while we were working on the screws. I said, there must be a better way to do this. And when I was in Port all of those 2 weeks, I used to go over the shipyard and watch them dock ships. And I figured if that's in my grade, I better learn what to do here. And I told the captain down there, I says, we've got a marine railway down here, but there's no blocks to dock any ships or anything. And I says, we've got it. I says, if we had some blocks, I says, I think I could dock these submarines. So the skipper went in town and he talked to the mayor there, and they got a bunch of aborigines and some who knew, and they went to the jungles and they cut these big eucalyptus trees and they brought them back to the ship. And on the ship we had big saws. We could cut the blocks to fit, and get a docking plan that tells you what size the block was, what the shape was. So we cut all the blocks for the submarine, and it took us about a month to get those blocks. And we set the blocks for the submarine, and we docked the first submarine, and we could take all the screws off without being in the water. And so the Lord came in. They wanted some new ship fitters for new destroyers that were being built, and I was only a second class. And so the skipper says, I'm going to make you a first class. I says, I just made second about 6 months ago. And I says, now I'm a first class. I thought that was great, but that was a mistake, because they wanted me to go back for a new ship, a destroyer, and the destroyers. I never wanted to be on a destroyer. Anyway, I went back to San Francisco and spent a month there, and had a report down at Long Beach, and I reported down there on the USS Brown 546. So I became a first-class ship fitter on there. And meantime, when we were to sea, we were assigned to an aircraft squadron. We had eight aircrafts, and we had 12 destroyers designed, and that's all we do, go from island to island and bomb them, and we go to the other ones. Then the troops would land on the islands with the Marines, and we would just continue clear across the Pacific. And